I should say the Republican Labour Working Group was set up in the Left Labour Alliance, and we've had about 4 meetings, including we had a kind of public event with Jackie Walker speaking to us. And the idea is that we wanted to see if we could cooperate and work with the Labour in Exile network, work together, cooperate together, share our ideas, and obviously report back to different organisations. But we can, by working together and reporting back to different organisations, we get a little bit of economies of scale, if you want, in terms of doing that. So we think that cooperating, sharing, working together. I should say that obviously all socialists are opposed to monarchy. It's a ridiculous, absurd, undemocratic institution, a national monument to class rule, class privilege, built into the foundations of our constitution and our laws and the way the state works. And if you wanted a recent example of how this might work, you know, one little example of which there are many, look at the case of the 1972 Shrewsbury building workers who were recently, after I think it must be 50 years, just this last few days ago, got their pardon. 50 years they were struggling against the system and the way that system worked to stitch them up, lock them up, turn them into political prisoners. And if you study that, what's going on behind the scenes, the role of secrecy, the role of the state, agents provocateurs, it shows the real nature of how the state works. 50 years to get any kind of justice for them. As we know, Ricky Tomlinson and Des Warren, and of course Des Warren died a few years ago. He suffered severely when he was in prison. But I mean, you could think of many, many different examples of the way in which our state and law actually operates. Now, we can all agree to oppose the monarchy, but as soon as we try to think, how important is this? What can we do about it? What should we put in its place? We start to become a little bit more disunited, and it can all fall apart like a cheap suit. So the idea was we need to get all our information, all our knowledge that we can get together from our tradition in order to produce an effective report that we can work on, gather that information together. There's always been a Republican element in the Labour Party, and there have been, in fact, 4, formally at least, Republican leaders of the Labour Party: Keir Hardie, George Lansbury, Michael Foot, and Jeremy Corbyn. The only one in my mind who you could say was a serious Republican, really, at the end of the day, was Tony Benn, who put a Republican bill to Parliament in 1992, and it's nothing has been done that's better than that and more serious from the Labour tradition. On the other hand, every Labour Prime Minister, Ramsay MacDonald, Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, they've all been loyal to the Crown and to the monarchy. Now, there is a deep crisis of democracy, whether we're talking about what's going on in the Labour Party or talk about what's going on in the state. And I just had a little look at the Tory manifesto. And this Tory manifesto from 2019 is both bland and menacing, because they understand how power works and they understand how they need to defend that power. So the number one thing for them, of course, is the union, which they're very, very worried about. But in their manifesto, they say that they need to look, and they're going to look this thing at what they say, the broader aspects of our constitution, the relationship between government, parliament and the courts, the functioning of the royal prerogative, the role of the House of Lords, the access to justice for ordinary people, the ability of security services to defend us against terrorism and organised crime. And they're going to update the Human Rights Act and administrative law to ensure that it all works wonderfully on our behalf.
Vamos, un corito sano, mi bebito tan loco que parece capestrano, acá se corre fino, no me
Sorry, we
clamo
seem
con
to have some
gusano.
interference. Can anyone see where the interference is coming from? Is it?
Sorry.
Sorry, I have muted everybody. Steve, can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry, Tina, there we go. I just stopped at that point. So I'm just simply reading out all the stuff from the Tory manifesto. It's bland, but it is actually quite threatening if you look to see what those words really mean and what they're planning to do. And they end up by saying, in the first year, they say, we will set up a Constitution, Democracy and Rights Commission to examine these issues in depth. So they're thinking about the issues and how they're going to change the state and reorganize the state and our laws and rights to their benefit. We on our side of the fence, Keir Starmer's doing something like talking about radical devolution, a reformed monarchy, a reformed House of Lords, and maybe even PR. But we on our side as socialists need to look at this whole question much more thoroughly and come up with our alternative to what the Tories are planning to do. There's a crisis of democracy, and the left needs to have a very clear and united position.